Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Inside Boxing Daily. I am your host for this evening, Jeremiah Preisser, and with me is our resident lawyer, John Einreinhofer. How you doing, John?
Good to be with you, Jeremiah. I get a chance to catch up on some boxing tonight.
Yeah, it's been a while, so it's good to hear from you. And I suppose I should preface all of this by telling you that we're brought to you by Seat Giant. Go to the website, click on the banner, go buy yourself some boxing tickets, and we'll get a little kickback for that. Also, the Retired Boxers Foundation with Jackie Richardson and the former amateur standout Alex Ramos. Again, boxers don't have 401k plans. It's tough for them out there. So go there, contribute, do what you can to help these guys out. Anyways, let's start with the first things first, and I just wanted to kick it off with a bit of news. I mean, it seems like just about everybody in the boxing world is aware of this at the moment, but Errol Spence was involved in a rollover in his Ferrari. This was late at night as well. He was in the intensive care unit, and from the statement that PBC recently released, it seems as if he's going to be okay. They expect him to make a full recovery, and he suffered no broken bones. I guess the only thing that he suffered were facial lacerations. Spence seems like a tough guy, but it seems like he's getting off pretty easy there, and I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean, the dude's obviously tough if that's all he's coming away with.
Yeah, and I'm really happy to hear the news about Errol Spence. You want to make sure that he's okay first, and it was a tragic situation just seeing an accident that bad, seeing what happened to him. And PBC did tweet out that report, as did Keith Idec. So it's reliable sources in terms of PBC would have some access, and Keith Idec is a really good reporter who's got a newspaper background and has good credibility. So I take that as the truth. I think that's true. And here I'm totally speculating. I have no information, but I don't think it's unfair until we hear more. Also because, and it's perfectly within Errol Spence's rights, unless there's a police, the police can subpoena records if they have an investigation, and that's a different issue. But in terms of just the general public and Errol Spence himself, he's got no duty to anybody to put his medical records out there. So why I'm prefacing that way is being a lawyer, the statement says no broken bones and just facial lacerations, but you saw the car roll over multiple times, and the reports that don't seem to be disputed was that he didn't have a seatbelt on, and it was an open-top vehicle, which, considering what sport he's in, what I hope is not the case. I hope it's not the case, but we might just have to wait a little bit. They don't say anything about his head and, whether he suffered a head injury or not. And initial reports I read were he is now awake, which would mean by definition, and injury work is one of the things I do, and I have, deposed hundreds of specialists. So I'm not a doctor, but I've run into this a lot.
You know a thing or two.
And and especially since it's an automobile, motor vehicle accidents is trucking is part of what I do, along with employment law. But I'm not going to diverge, but it is directly on point with this. This is an automobile accident, a serious automobile accident, even though it was one car, and they're not saying that if he had to awake, that would mean by definition, brain injury wise, that he had at least some form of a brain injury. It could be the form of a brain injury where, the equivalent of like when a boxer gets knocked out in a fight. But, remember, he's in the sport of professional boxing where getting hit in the head is part of your living. And, understandably, if something like that is going on, and he's going to try to come back. We're totally speculating at this point. We don't have enough information, but that might be something that they don't want to talk about. So I hope for because of the business he's in and just for his life, even if he couldn't box again, I hope that's not the case, because, you can have complications from a head injury, and some head injuries are more mild where he could recover even if he had a concussion and he was out. But I'd like to wait a little more till, it's good, obviously survivable, but I hope I hope there's no head injury involved there. And they seem to exclude that with the positive report that we did get.
Yeah. I did hear, though I'm not sure, that some drinking was involved. But anyways, we all wish him well. I mean, obviously, he's the number one welterweight in the world. For this to end his career early, that would be a tragedy unto itself. But we'll move on. We're actually going to talk, because it's been a while since John and I got on air, we're going to take it back to the Errol Spence and Shawn Porter card. We're going to start low on the totem pole, as I typically do on this show. And I'm going to start with the Barrios versus Akhmedov fight. I thought it was interesting. This was actually the first fight that I saw in full. I missed a little bit of the Josecito Lopez versus Molina fight. I figured that would steal the show. It didn't end up being that. But actually, let's start with Lopez Molina, because I think there was a little less interest in that when the fight actually happened. Again, I was under the impression, I think we both were, that could potentially steal the show, might be the fight of the night. And all it proved really to me was that Lopez still has a little bit left. Molina is pretty much shot.
Yeah, I agree. And even though both guys have provided entertainment in the past going in, and I was like everybody else, made the fight somewhat interesting, especially because, John Molina during his career has had power. He's been hurt and dropped a lot, but he's had power. But as you saw, it looks like his last, to me, it turned out that his last hurrah was in the Red Catch fight, because Red Catch hurt him early, almost had him out, and he had the heart and the fortitude and still his old power to come back. But a little bit of time, that was a war, and a little bit of time has passed even since that. You didn't see the power in his fight with Figueroa, really, which concerned me a bit. He did go the distance, though, and, Figueroa has some pop, and so his chin held up in that. But, Josecito Lopez, one thing he's never been, even when he's had his high moments, is a puncher. He did hurt Keith Thurman. He didn't drop him, though, but he's never been a puncher, even in his big moments. Victor Ortiz, he stopped, but Ortiz had retired, kind of threw in the towel in a lot of fights, and that's not really necessary because Lopez was that kind of a puncher. So, well, surprised that he was able to hurt Molina right off the bat and actually get him out of there. That's a surprise. But like you said, Jeremiah, really that, and as evidenced by John Molina retiring after the fight, it just turned out John Molina doesn't have anything really there. And when you look at PBC's recent patterns, it could look with Thurman, and I can't fault them there. They've had charm matchmaking this year, where even when you had matches on paper that didn't look like they'd be that good, PBC has got a lot of good fights out of them. I mean, I've been surprised. I almost don't know how they're doing it, but their matchmaker does a good job, and that is somebody's job. What I'm saying with that is, if they're going to put Josecito Lopez on a free Fox card as a lower risk opponent for one of their better known welterweights, I mean, we could do worse. In other words, he can provide a decent fight. I don't think he's going to win, but I mean, that may be what this win ends up getting him, which he had that shot with Thurman, but he'll probably get another shot like that.
Yeah, he likely is going to get another shot. Hold on, sorry, let me turn down my mic here. But yeah, it looks like he is going to get another shot. And, Lopez, it's tough because I like the guy. I mean, I've been following his career for quite a while. I met him personally. So there's some affection there. And he always gives everything he's got. I mean, that's why people are so drawn to him. And I don't want to see him get another real big name. I mean, at this point, he's just completely outgunned against, somebody like Spence. I don't think he has much of a chance against Pacquiao. I mean, he's not a top 10 welterweight, so I don't want to see him fight somebody as if he is a top 10 welterweight. But it was, he didn't know what to expect. He figured a good Molina was going to show up. He got the job done. He's going to move on. But so long as they don't pair him with somebody at the very top, I don't mind. If they just keep putting him in against, they could put him in against Ivan Redkach, and I think that would be a damn good fight, especially after Redkach just stopped Devon Alexander. I think that would be fun. Redkach looked pretty solid at 147. So something like that to me would make a lot of sense.
That's
What were you
so
going to say?
because, and you make a good, sorry to interrupt, but I was just going to say you make a good point, because one thing I do like about following PBC is just simply because they have the free access and their stable so big compared to the other promoters, is doing what we're doing now and knowing these things can happen. Red Catch would be a very good, entertaining fight to be thrown somewhere on Fox, even if an undercard bout against Josecito Lopez. And another good one would be a guy you and I both like, who's on his way up and I think would be ready for him, and it would be about perfect, would be a perfect step-up fight for Stanionis, and you could even put that as a main event, as sort of an introduction of him to the general public, because he's one of PBC's top potential up-and-coming guys, and that would be a real good fight. And Stanionis would have to work for that win, and it'd be something Lopez could get up for, and it'd probably be entertaining.
Yeah. Sorry. Again, I'm trying to fiddle with my mic here, but I think that'd be a great idea. I think Stanionis is a damn good prospect, and of course, I mean, anybody who follows me personally knows that I'm pretty high on the guy. I like what I see so far. Somebody like Freddie Roach has been speaking highly of him, and we'll see. I think that's a damn good suggestion. Again, I think Red Catch would be a good suggestion as well. And anyways, we'll move on to the Barrios versus Akhmedov fight. This one was a lot more competitive. You saw a lot of people a little bit upset with the decision itself. A lot of people had Akhmedov winning, though I think the feeling was that Akhmedov won more rounds, but because of the two knockdowns, a draw wasn't inconceivable. So I didn't hate the decision. I did think a draw was just about the right thing, honestly, but Barrios started quickly. His height was giving Akhmedov issues. He landed some nice counter punches as well. But he looked like he was fading in the second half of the fight, and Akhmedov's schooling kind of took over. He was going to the body well. He was landing a bunch of overhand lefts to the face. I had a problem with the decision a little bit, but I think a draw was about the right thing to do. I don't know. What do you think, John?
I thought it was close. Barrios, and I thought he was a solid prospect. I didn't like him as much as some others. I've said that, before the fight, and odds makers had it close going in, which, usually they know what they're doing, and know better than everybody else, and they got that one right because it was real tight. I did think Barrios, with the knockdowns, did enough to win the fight, though it was tight. And it was a real tight. I think, again, because I didn't quite think as much of him as some of the other prospects, I'd say, even as tight as it was and as hard as he had to work and really needed that knockdown at the end, good win for him, because he fought a determined opponent who brought something to the table. So I think it actually, even though some people didn't like the decision and the way it went, and there's no doubt he had a lot of trouble there, it probably elevates him a little bit. He almost, with his height, he almost seems like he would be a guy that might be better off, even though PBC's loaded there. But then again, when it's loaded, you got bigger money opportunities too. That he might want to go to the 147. I think the weight stuff's overrated, especially when we're not talking about the original classes. But that's where sometimes I see a guy like him, or, I've said it before with David Benavides at 168, and we'll talk about him in a little bit. There are occasional instances where I see a guy who's cutting weight thinking he's getting some advantage, and just looks to me like a guy a little bit weakened. And that's where I look at sometimes the weight, where I think, this guy should probably just put on the 7 pounds and be a little stronger and have a better diet going in, and he'd be better off. I think Barrios might be one of those guys.
Yeah, he certainly looks like a big guy. He's awfully tall. He's rangy. I mean, he's got some good stuff there, but I was a little upset at just how porous his defense was. He was constantly taking overhand lefts, and he didn't seem like he had much in terms of an answer for it. So in a rematch, I would think, that Akhmedov would do better. But it was a damn good fight. I mean, I think that's what's most important here is that it was a good competitive fight. Akhmedov, granted, he had a ton of amateur background, or he had a ton of amateur fights. He performed admirably, and I think, again, I'd like to see a rematch. I think it's worthwhile. I just don't know what PBC is going to do. Anyways, we'll look forward to it and see what eventually does come of it. Also on the card was David Benavidez versus Anthony Durrell. And it wasn't quite the walkover that some of us thought it might be. Durrell did box pretty smartly. He was competitive early. He did land some good shots. His movement did seem like it was giving David Benavidez some issues, but eventually Benavidez caught up to him. He was jabbing nicely, started banging the body quite good, and Durrell fought through a serious cut, and I was pretty impressed with David Benavidez. The only thing I would say about his performance that I didn't quite like, well, a couple things really, is that he didn't seem as quick as I remember him before, and he did seem to have a little trouble with lateral movement.
Yeah, nothing with the fight surprised me too much. I mean, maybe Durrell won a couple more rounds than I expected, but, I never felt Benavidez was threatened or anything like that. But I agree with you in terms of, Anthony Durrell's strategy, which really, out of the two Durrells, he was always the bigger puncher. And, it was Andre who was the boxer and who would always, box in fights. And I saw the same thing with Anthony, which in the pros he hadn't done as much. He was trying to box Benavidez some. And, it's just too late in his career for that for me. I mean, you come up with a strategy and stuff, but usually when you're going to make those kind of changes that much out of character, because again, he was always more the puncher of the two and had a higher knockout percentage and had decent power. And I thought I didn't think he had a chance going in, but I thought really to have a chance, he would just have to be his old self and bang Benavidez and try to put some hurt on him. And that wasn't part of the game plan. And you could see it was just kind of, falling into survival mode. Not that Durrell wasn't trying or fighting. He wasn't a fighter like that. But just that, where it gets beyond the point where the guy's really even in there to win anymore. He's just kind of fighting some and trying to see if he can hang around the distance. And when it got to that point, it was over pretty shortly after that. But he did get a bad cut as well. Benavidez, as I was just saying a minute ago, we're talking about Barrios. And with Benavidez, even though understandably the competition was less, he did weigh in as a light heavyweight a lot in his fights on the way up. And I thought he looked better and stronger. Again, understanding the competition is different, but I still, just with the eye test looking at him and knowing his history, which, he was like 250 pounds as a kid, and he's lost weight, and that's admirable. And look, he's top pro boxer. But that to me is like, again, even only 7 pounds difference between 168 and 175. But when you got a guy who was, like 250 pounds literally as a teenager, and he's cutting down to 168 pounds, I just always think he even when he's looked better, he just looks a little bit weak at that weight for his size. And I think he'd be stronger at light heavyweight, even though it's the higher weight. I think with more weight and with his history of having been so heavy when he was younger, I just think 168 is too low. And sometimes you'd seen that in the past with certain guys going back decades, even when people cared about less weight classes, but maybe if they were trying to make a certain lower weight class, that it does seem sometimes if a guy's doing that and it goes too long, sometimes they can get stale and then they don't end up reaching their potential. So I've been saying it for a while. I'll keep saying it, and because I agree with you, Jeremiah. There are moments with him where you don't see him looking quite as good as you think he could, and I think he should. Even though there's a good fight or two out there for him, I think he should go up to the tougher division, light heavyweight, and I think he'd be better off, even though he's got tougher competition there.
Yeah, I think he would be excellent there. I think he would be a damn good addition. I will say that again, I know neither one of us are big fans of 168 or, really any of the super/junior divisions. But I would like to see him become the champion before he moves up. Again, I do think he'll fit into 175 just fine. I think, he's going to be a player as well. I would just like to see these guys at least fight their number one guys. I don't like the junior/super divisions, but it's like Gervonta Davis. Before he moved up to 135, I would have liked to have seen him, at least squeeze in Miguel Burchelt. Granted, just because his overall competition has been pretty piss poor, and it would just be a nice feather in the cap to at least get it done, just to say that, hey, I beat the number one guy there. If he doesn't, I won't be too upset. It's not that big of a deal to me. But I do think Callum Smith is an interesting fight. I think Caleb Plant is also an interesting match for him. So again, those are fights that I would like to see. And again, I don't like the divisions, but I'm trying to work within the framework that we have. I would like to see one of those fights before he moves up to 175. But again, if he doesn't, I'm not going to be that upset. Anyways, we're going to move on to.
No, I agree. I look at just one point before we move on from that. Yeah, I do the same in the sense that I've focused on the last year or two, and I think it has been helpful to me. I encourage everybody else to do it with the fractured nature of the sport. Is let's get the good in-house fights first before we even worry about crossover, even though there might be a great fight there. And I agree with you in the sense that I don't like the 168, but PBC has Benavidez, they have Plant. I would like to see that fight made, while those two guys are at that weight, because that's a good fight, and PBC can make that fight really whenever they do want to make the fight. So, before one or both of them moved on, yeah, I would like to at least see that one because that would be easily makeable. And I can give you an example, like you just said. I always thought, and then I saw some other people did pick up on this, but I thought this a while back, if he was looking for a fight for Gervonta Davis, get him up to the 155 already, the traditional division lightweight, and Robert Easter was there. It would have been an interesting fight with Easter's height. But now Easter's going to be fighting at 140, and like you said, now Davis is just finally up to 135, and then you don't get that fight even though they're both with PBC. That's the stuff that gets frustrating.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sorry again. But yeah, I agree. It would be nice to see, again, Anthony Durrell isn't quite the test that I would like to see from Benavidez. Again, Durrell is a good fighter. I understand the alphabet stuff as much as I hate it. But, in his mind, he was going to get a trinket that he never lost. Anyways, let's move on to the Errol Spence and Shawn Porter main event here. And, well, John, you did say that Spence was that good and that he was going to stop Shawn Porter. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. Porter brought it. He was rough. He was pretty good on the inside. I mean, I will say that some people who had it for Porter, I didn't quite see that, honestly. I mean, Porter was good. He was more competitive than a lot of people thought. He was rough. He was landing, as he always does, he was landing some shots from some odd angles, but he really wasn't hurting Spence. Spence was the more thudding guy. He was accurate. He was pretty good on the inside. He was banging the body consistently, and I don't think the commentators were giving him enough credit for it. I thought that Spence won clear enough, but it was very competitive.
Yeah, it ended up being a great fight. You're right. Always high on Spence. Always thought he'd win the fight, no doubt there. Was waffling in the day or two before the fight. Would he stop him or not? I did end up thinking that he would be able to get the stoppage, which of course he dropped him with a big shot late. Now, where I want to give Shawn the credit, though, the part that I didn't see was that I thought Shawn Porter at his age, with a lot of tough, high-pressure fights under his belt, I thought we saw signs in recent fights like the Ugas and the Danny Garcia fight that he was not willing to fight like the old Shawn Porter. And he's in his 30s now. That's the part that surprised me, where I give Shawn Porter a lot of credit. He was able, against an opponent as good as Errol Spence, he was able to crank up that old high-pressure Shawn Porter. Reminded me of the Shawn Porter we saw come close to beating Keith Thurman. I thought Keith Thurman beat him, but it was a very tight fight. And that impressed me about Shawn Porter, to do that against somebody as good as Spence. that he came and he was still able to bring it like that one more time. Now, I agree with you, Jeremiah. One thing you and I have both said that, and you weren't sure about it earlier in Porter's career, but as his career's gone on, he still proved he could do the high pressure style, but he just doesn't bang that. He just doesn't bang that hard. And when you fight with that kind of a style, that's a big detriment, to you. Even though he really is basically proved with all his competitive fights against top opposition, he's a guy just about at the top of the division, but he does get hurt sometimes by that lack of power.
Sorry, having having a few issues with my mic. I'm trying to get my adjustment correctly, but yeah, it was one of those things. I mean, Spence going into the fight, he did have a good reputation, obviously. I mean, a lot of people thought that he was the best welterweight in the world, and I think no matter how you slice it, he is the number one welterweight in the world at this juncture. I mean, his resume speaks for itself. It's significantly better than Terrence Crawford's. And in terms of the Crawford bout, it's going to be a little while before we get the Crawford bout. There's been rumors going around that Spence and Crawford are going to fight in 2020. Maybe that's the case. Maybe it's late. Who knows? But Spence, to his credit, is doing a good job of building his brand. The Mikey Garcia fight, say what you want about Mikey Garcia at 147, but he was a good sell. Therefore, Spence is becoming a bigger and bigger sell. And, the fact that he's from Texas, which is a big state, means that there's some room for growth there. And the Porter fight, in my opinion, answers some questions that I was wondering about. I mean, whenever you see these guys and, they're blowing guys away or they look very good, you still wonder how they're going to react in certain situations. So with Shawn Porter, he's one of those guys who can help answer questions. So when the going gets tough, does this guy get going? And I think Spence proved that he does. That he's not going to fold under pressure. He wasn't that bothered by it. In fact, it was a surprisingly clean fight for as rough as it was. And as close as their heads were, and how often they fought on the inside. But that's one of the things that I was most impressed with about Spence, is that when the going got tough, he got going. He didn't fold at all. Didn't seem like it bothered him. He had a little cut on his eye. Didn't bother him. And for that, I think he needs some commending as well.
Yeah, it was surprising, really, even though I thought highly of him, that he showed the dimension where he was able to stand there with a guy like Shawn Porter, really bang it out with him. And I was looking at the Gil Clancy line that I always like, that I get back to a lot, that, sometimes you got to look at which version of a guy is in the fight. And I saw the Shawn Porter that fought Keith Thurman in there, with Spence, and I wasn't expecting that. That's the part that I wasn't expecting. And so I'm looking at it, and I had to adjust my mind and say, hey, he's now, with the guy that fought Thurman, which I think even the odds makers, if they knew that guy was going to be there, it would have been tighter going, and Spence would have still been a favorite, but, might not have been like an 8-1-ish favorite. And, so Spence was facing that in the ring. And like you said, he proved some intangibles that you like to see, that he could stand there and really even score the knockdown late. I was with you. I thought Spence was, winning the fight, but there were a lot of close rounds there. And then I thought the knockdown pretty much sealed that he was going to win. I also didn't see the case for Porter actually winning the fight, but I got to give Shawn Porter credit, though. Even though I thought he lost this fight, I thought he lost to Thurman. And I really thought even Danny Garcia could have gotten the decision against him, even though not that many people did. Some did. But on the other hand, even with the Kell Brook fight, which was a dull wrestling fight, though, but that was not a clear win for Kell Brook. People are, fantasizing that in hindsight. I did think Brook did just enough to win, but getting to is you could make a case for Shawn Porter getting the decision in every loss he's had. So, with the guys he's fought, at his age, that's pretty impressive. And, he's probably going to get some more big fights because of it.
Yeah, I think he deserves them too. I mean, I think he deserves another big payday. I mean, he's, like you said, he's proven himself. I mean, I'm actually of the opinion that Kell Brook was probably, as skillful as he looked in that bout, I was least impressed by his performance in comparison to the others. I mean, the other victors, that is. I mean, I actually thought Keith Thurman and Errol Spence were both more impressive than Kell Brook in those performances. Kell Brook was good. Again, he was skillful, but he was doing a lot of the same thing where he was staying at range, he was throwing jabs, and then he was leading with right hands, would connect, tie up, and then reset and repeat. And again, it was a good performance. I don't want to take much away from him. He did win, and I did think he deserved the win. I just was less impressed because he was in harm's way less than everyone. Yeah, I know. Maybe people will attribute that to being smart. Okay, but to me, Keith Thurman and Errol Spence had the best performances against Shawn Porter. And like you said, Danny Garcia, it wouldn't have been crazy if he got the decision either. But Porter certainly deserves another payday, in my opinion. I mean, we're talking about he's barely lost to three of the best welterweights of his generation. All of those guys. I believe when he fought all of these men, they were top three at least. I'm not exactly sure what Keith Thurman was when they first fought, but I know he was highly ranked. He was certainly in the top 10 at least. And so we are talking about Porter being a damn good fighter, regardless of his shortcomings. I would say that Keith Thurman versus Shawn Porter might make some sense to PBC, seeing as they were trying to set up the rematch beforehand. I'm not quite sure I want to see it. I mean, I know it would be entertaining, but I'm not quite sure that's the avenue that I would like to take. Errol Spence, we'll have to wait and see on the details for him. But what do you think about granted, everything is okay, of course, and again, we hope that it is, but how would you feel, or how do you feel about Danny Garcia coming into the ring and them announcing that's what's next?
Yeah, I mean, I got mixed emotions about it because you'd like to see him. You like. I mean, you do have PBC. The mixed emotions is when people are talking about the Crawford fight, and I'm not saying I want to see a 41-year-old Pacquiao get hurt, but he's coming off a huge win, and Transnational has him up to number 2. Spence is number 1. The purest part of me about filling real lineal titles or getting clear champions makes me tempted to want to see Spence Pacquiao, even though I wouldn't see any way for Pacquiao to win it. I'm kind of eliminating the Crawford thing because of the cross-promotional stuff and the way the business is structured. I don't, like some people, I really don't blame PBC because, they're putting their fight. They're making investments, putting their fighters on free TV. Yeah, Crawford's got some ESPN, but there's ESPN Plus there too. And I know PBC's had pay-per-view, but Fox has put a lot in the promotion. And I'm just saying, Garcia is a top fighter. I don't blame them for going with their own guy. It's not like Danny Garcia is some chump or anything. I just think that PBC, by going to too many pay-per-views, even though Spence has done okay with them, is just it's leaving the door open for DAZN. And it's not that when on the pay-per-view and your PBC that I care that much either way, but it's just that I thought PBC had the best model overall. I still do, but I think when they go to a lot of pay-per-views, like, they're talking about that Danny Garcia was going to be pay-per-view then, and they're announcing it right off, and you got Wilder Ortiz, and that to me leaves the door open for DAZN, on the 1 year plan, because they are offering enough good fights in the fall that, they didn't rip off their people that went in on the 1 year plan for the $100. So, that leaves the competition open. I think if PBC could have gone maybe another year and not gone all these pay-per-views, I think they might have buried everybody else, because even though they've had some good fights on free TV, you would have also had fights like Spence Porter on free TV and a Pacquiao Thurman if they really, really made that kind of investment, because of the money Pacquiao gets. But in PBC's defense, there probably is a business argument that when DAZN arguably started overpaying for people, that, Heyman, by all accounts, keeps his guys happy, and he's probably looking at he is looking at these types of fights, like, with Wilder and Spence and Pacquiao, and he's saying that I got to get these guys paid.
Do you think that? How do you see that fight playing out? I want to get your early opinion. How do you see Garcia versus Spence playing out? I mean, do you see it? If Spence would have went out there and stopped Porter relatively early, maybe in the middle rounds, I think him stopping Garcia would sound a bit better. But it's hard not to see as this as a potential 12-rounder as well. What say you?
Yeah, I would think the same. First of all, it's total speculation, but at this point, with what's happened, within the last 24 hours or so, I'm guessing, we'll see that. But let's say, theoretically, we're talking about before Errol Spence's accident, since we don't have a lot of information yet. I think that Danny Garcia's always had that defensive slant, where he likes to counterpunch and he doesn't like to open up. Punch volume's down, even though his offensive skills are great, and he's shown a really good chin as well. That's the Achilles heel. That leaves him where he loses the close decision when he doesn't throw enough. Now, he opened up big time against Granados, but the problem is, Granados is not anything close to Errol Spence, and that's what sometimes can fool you in boxing is, then we have to try to figure out, does that mean anything against an Errol Spence? And it means a little, just that Garcia did open up, but not against somebody as good as Spence. And I agree with you. You've got to figure against somebody as offensively talented as Spence, his hands would not be, Garcia's hands would not be moving that much. And that puts you, but he's got a good chin and he knows how to defend and he's got enough power to make you think about it. So that leads to a recipe for an Errol Spence decision if that fight were to happen.
Yeah, and I would say, I will note before we move on, that I would really like to see Danny Garcia come at Errol Spence like he did his last opponent. I think that would be excellent. I actually think that would make a damn good fight. And that's really what Danny Garcia has to do. He just has to open up more. I mean, he's a sharp guy. He throws hooks a bit too much, but he's a good puncher. I think he has one of the best chins in boxing. I don't think there's any doubt about that. But I just want to see him open up more, and I think he really has to understand that if he wants this, and again, this is all hoping that Errol Spence is okay, but granted he's the same thing, Danny Garcia just has to realize that opening up is his best key to victory. Anyways, we're going to move on to the following weekend, and as I said in my article that I just published today, we work with a website called BoxStat. It's kind of like CompuBox. It's a little bit different. It's more like graphs as opposed to just pure numbers. They do a good job over there. They send me an email every Monday, every Tuesday. They put some confidence in me to write these up fairly and convey the information in a way that I think a lot of people can understand. So in it, what was the punch stats numbers to this fight, of course, but what I said in my opening paragraph and what I think is most important, the most important data point of anything, but both these weekends, is the fact that we had two potential Fight of the Year candidates back-to-back weekends. It is not often that happens, especially in the modern state of boxing, so I'm quite happy with that at least, regardless of the decisions, regardless of how anybody felt about the individual decisions themselves. I was very happy with the way that things turned out. Anyways, I'm just going to briefly touch on a few things. I just want to touch on the Ivan Baranchyk fight. He fought a guy who was a pretty wily veteran, a guy who was crafty, been in there with some good fighters, lasted the distance. Baranchyk just overpowered him, ended up scoring a stoppage. He landed a left hook to the body, was pretty sinister. I mean, it was a damn good shot. But his problem, of course, is Baranchyk seems like he could be a top 10 guy for a while if he wants to, but he just lacks the nuance to get to the very top. Also, Ali Akhmedov fought Hernandez in the co-main event. Akhmedov is a gym mate of Golovkin's. He fights like Golovkin. He even celebrated like Golovkin after he got the stoppage victory. He threw a nice left-hand feint, connected with a good straight right hand to the upper part of the head, scored about a 30-second knockout. So, of course, with any broadcast. They had to kill a bunch of time. Wasn't the best undercard, but those two guys did look good in getting stoppages. In fact, there's a lot of stoppages on that undercard, so that was a good thing. I don't like to see things dragged out that much, especially if we don't have to, and especially if we got punchers in there. Speaking of punchers, in the main event, of course, we had Gennady Golovkin versus Sergiy Derevyanchenko. And Derevyanchenko, according to Transnational, was the number 3 rated middleweight in the world. I think the Ring had him number 6, if I'm not mistaken. I think they had him behind Golovkin, Andre, Charlo, Murata, Jacobs, and that put him at 6. And of course, Alvarez, of course, who's the champion. I don't think I need to explain that, but yeah, so we're talking about 2 top 5 guys, because again, Daniel Jacobs is no longer middleweight. He may not officially be out of the rankings, but unfortunately, he's got something scheduled, not officially, but apparently he's dealing, wheeling and dealing with Julio Cesar Chavez Jr., not something any of us want to see. But again, Daniel Jacobs is not a middleweight anymore. He's not going to fight there. So to me, Derevyanchenko is a bona fide top 5 guy. Golovkin is obviously the number 1 guy besides the champion. And this is what happens in boxing. When you pair guys who are in the top 5 against one another in good divisions like middleweight and welterweight is, you get something like this, John.
Yeah, you do get more of that potential. And it was definitely a great fight. I agree with you. 2 great fights 2 weeks in a row. That's good for boxing. The only downside of it was one was pay-per-view and one was DAZN. And the sad reality is when you add that up, not that many people are seeing these fights, and that is a shame. But no argument about how good the 2 fights were. It was great seeing, like you said, you get guys that are top 5-ish going at it. You get good fights, and even really if you get 2 totally legit top 10 guys, which you don't get enough. But that's what you got here, because the skill levels are higher, obviously. Going into the fight, the question for me was, could Derevyanchenko take Golovkin's power? I was leaning that he might not be able to, but I did even tweet out before the fight that I thought if he could take it, I did see this scenario. I thought then, he has skill level and the aggression, and to me, Golovkin gets hit a lot. That Derevyanchenko was going to be able to oblige him there, and that's what happened. And you got a great fight. Golovkin did show his power early and knocking down Derevyanchenko, which you have to give Golovkin credit there, because since his knockouts started, he's knocked down and knocked out everybody he's fought except for Canelo Alvarez, which shows you a lot about Canelo's chin and also Golovkin's power. So you have to give him credit there. That's not flukish, and it ended up being a great fight. Both guys really had to go to war by the end of it, and I thought Derevyanchenko did do enough to win the fight. I thought there was enough close rounds there that I didn't look at it as a robbery type of thing, because some of those rounds were just really tight. I thought Derevyanchenko was landing the better shots and doing enough to win them, but they were close enough that I could see where somebody could reasonably have him the other way. So I thought Derevyanchenko edged it out, but it ended up being a great fight for the fans that did see it.
Yeah, it certainly did. Sorry again, I'm messing with my volume here just because I'm having a little problems with my headphones tonight. So apologies to anybody listening out there. I've just got to keep readjusting just so I can get it right, because it's hard hearing you at times, John. Not because of your phone. It's just it must be my headphones or the connection or something. Anyways, yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I think the general feeling is that Derevyanchenko edged it. I think, I've seen a ton of scorecards. You know how I am. I always like to scour social media, and it's not because I'm looking to see if I'm wrong. I like to temper my own scoring with other people's, especially people who are educated, because it's one of those things. Like, I've seen a lot of fights in my day, and there are some days where you just get it wrong. I mean, some days you're paying too much attention to one guy's work, and you end up edging him. Some days, You're watching a guy too much, and you're thinking, even if a guy's losing, you're like, hey, he's doing better than expected. And you give him rounds that maybe most people didn't think. Maybe all sorts of factors play in. We're humans, we're emotional creatures. Again, so I like to see what everybody's saying, what they're, and there was a lot of cards either way, but the general feeling amongst most fans to me was that Derevyanchenko edged it. It seems as if there were swing rounds. There were a good number of swing rounds, though I think that some of the judges' scorecards were little. There wasn't a lot of agreement there, even though they all had Golovkin winning. It just felt as if Derevyanchenko was more of the boss in there, and that he deserved more of the swing rounds than Golovkin. But I'm like you. I actually missed a couple rounds, and I haven't gone back and watched it yet. I missed a couple rounds as I was watching it, so I didn't score it tightly afterwards because I didn't have a good view. The rounds that I missed, some people were like, hey, Golovkin could have edged it. Somebody's, I can't remember which rounds it was in particular, but yeah, it just felt like Derevyanchenko, he was a bit busier. I mean, he threw, and again, I touch on this in my article, but Derevyanchenko actually threw more punches in a 12-round contest than anybody Golovkin has ever fought. He was at 935 punches, about 78 a round. He had an excellent work rate. I mean, I was really impressed. I was impressed with him during the Jacobs fight, but I think I was more impressed here because he got knocked down early. It's easy to lay down against somebody like Golovkin, who all he has to do is hit you once, and it hurts. And a lot of guys don't like that. We saw like a guy like Dominic Wade, for instance. He got hits, pretty much a few times cleanly, and he packed it in and said, I'm going to collect my paycheck and be on with my day. Derevyanchenko got up and fought hard. I was impressed. I was really impressed with his angles. He was circling around a lot. He wasn't giving up the play. Actually, it kind of reminded me of Luke Campbell and Vasyl Lomachenko a little bit. And the only way I relate those two is when Luke Campbell was fighting Lomachenko, and Lomachenko would come on, and he would land a lot of crisp, clean, accurate shots. Luke Campbell, besides the one round in which he did fall down, he never really let the play get too far away. He never let him keep pouring it on. And the same thing with Derevyanchenko is whenever the play got taken away, he tried to take it back almost immediately. It almost kind of reminded me of Marco Antonio Barrera. It's like when you get hit, I try to hit you back. And it's a great way to stem the momentum of guys who are big punchers. And Golovkin, to me, He was obviously very good early. He was pretty sharp. He seemed like he was in pretty good shape. But he also appeared just a little bit older than he had before. But I also attribute that to Derevyanchenko's body work. I mean, he was landing a bunch of left hooks to the body, and it looked like he almost doubled Golovkin over a couple of times. There was that one especially, I think it was the end of round 5. Again, I don't know why this is a little fuzzy to me, but there was a left hook where you could see that he was seriously hurt. And to Golovkin's credit, this is a guy who's 37 years old. He could pack it in as well. He doesn't need to fight on if he doesn't want to. He's collected a good number of paydays. He's got a little stock in the zone. He's going to do some promoting afterward. So for him to take some of those body shots and keep going, and at 37 years old, it's as if he's still must-see TV. I was really impressed with both guys, and I wouldn't mind seeing them run it back.
Yeah, I wouldn't. I'm up for seeing this fight again. You have to adjust sometimes where in life, if you're learning, where events change, and that's the way I look at this one. We had a great fight. I agree. Both men showed a lot of heart and fought tough. It was very entertaining, good, even matchup. In other words, you wouldn't have thought that going in, this would be something you wanted to see again. But in that sense, it's like a Ruiz Joshua type of thing. I mean, things change, and I think that when you look at future fights for Golovkin, this should certainly be on the radar. And when you look at fights that the Zone could give, this would be one of the better ones they can give now. So I wouldn't have any problem with seeing it again. I mean, Golovkin's got one of the best chins in boxing. It's really either him or Canelo Alvarez, I think. And it's funny that they fought 24 rounds because they really do have the two best chins in boxing, I think. So, Golovkin, his defense at this point to me is his chin. And, it's either him or Canelo Alvarez for the best chin in boxing. I think, take your pick. Derevyanchenko's maybe not the biggest banger, but he can punch. And, Golovkin, again, able to absorb a lot of clean shots. He's been able to do it against Jacobs. He's been able to do it against, Canelo Alvarez. So, just even against those three guys alone, he's shown what kind of chin he has. And I did, tweet it before the fight, and I think it proved to be the case, which is interesting. But, and you said, Jeremiah, really even you can make the argument with punch stats, which they can be good for some things, some not for, but it is interesting seeing how many a guy actually throws. And, you said Derevyanchenko has thrown the most ever against Golovkin. And that does interest me because what I'm getting to is, I think pre-Daniel Jacobs, I think Derevyanchenko would be by far better than anybody Golovkin had fought, and I don't even think it's close. So, it just turned out that, as he's in this point of his career, the three best guys he's fought are, Canelo Alvarez, Daniel Jacobs, and Sergiy Derevyanchenko, and they've all been tough fights, but wouldn't be bad for Golovkin to do this one again. If not, then you wonder where he goes. You don't know what Canelo is going to do. It seems that Canelo was kind of candid on his press conference today and reading the translations, and one of the things he said, which I actually tend to believe, is that he's not sure yet what he's going to do after the Kovalev fight. He might fight at light heavy after this and just stay there, or he could drop down a little bit or take another middleweight fight, but he's not sure what he's going to do yet. And that's probably true. So, we've seen this later in guys' careers. You could pick different examples throughout boxing history, especially even more recently. What I'm saying is, who knows? If the money's there, Golovkin's going to do it. So maybe Canelo Alvarez, Gennady Golovkin 3 could have at light heavyweight. Who knows?
Yeah, it very well may be the case, but I think Alvarez is right as well. And it's obviously, I like Golovkin. I'm not as critical of Alvarez as some other guys are. That's boxing. There's a lot of partisanship going on. I actually talked to John Responti earlier, and he made a great point. And he was talking about how Golovkin is a bit like Tony Zale, and how Tony Zale was, called the Man of Steel, and during his prime, he was very, very difficult to knock down. He wasn't being knocked out. And then later on, as he aged, he was just getting hit more and more, and eventually he got stopped by Rocky Graziano and then beat up by Marcel Cerdan. And so, I thought it was a pretty good comparison because you saw vulnerabilities in Golovkin that, I think just show that the end is near. I mean, I think Golovkin is an outlier because he's an aggressor at 37 years old, and he's still operating at the highest level. I mean, you could argue either way, but you could say reasonably that he beat the third best middleweight in the world. And again, that's at 37 years old. So I think it shows that his decline has been pretty steady, which is lucky. And I think it shows that he's been living cleanly. The fact that he had a bunch of fights early on in his career, especially when it came to America. I mean, he was averaging about 4 fights a year there for a while. And that was until he started becoming more popular. Then he was doing about 3 fights a year. And now, I think at 34 plus, he's down to about 2. But the fact that he trains hard, he was consistent, he lives cleanly, he's not, obviously you never hear him doing anything wacky. He's not out at a bar, not at a club, getting wasted, fighting people, rapping, throwing money around, whatever it may be. He seems like a consummate professional, one who's dedicated to his profession, and I think he deserves a lot of credit for that. But again, we're talking about a guy who is 37, and I just don't think there's much to indicate at this point that Alvarez would lose that fight. I mean, there's some appeal to me because Golovkin may still bring the dog out in Canelo for, even if it's not as much as it was in the second fight. But there's just nothing there to indicate that Alvarez is going to have any more trouble than he did in the second time. And it's possible that he stops Golovkin at this point. Again, I know we talked after the Daniel Jacobs fight, and I think some of us kind of reshaped our views then, though I know Mike and I did, where we thought if a third fight with Golovkin came off, it's possible that it would go 12 rounds once again, because I know him and I and you also had some concern, because Golovkin is just not as good as he was. I mean, and that's ultimately the biggest point, is that Alvarez is better, Golovkin is worse. How could the result be much different? And it just doesn't appear as if it would be. So where does that leave both of these guys? Canelo Alvarez pretty much has free reign to do what he likes. The WBC, I hate him, but they gave him that special status, which pretty much allows him to do what he likes. I mean, he's the quote-unquote franchise champion, and he's under no obligation to defend that honor. He's not even considered the WBC titleist, right? I mean, Jamal Charlo now has that, for whatever that's worth. I hate it. But yeah, so what we see is Canelo Alvarez, and the fact that he's backed by DAZN, has huge money doing so. He can pretty much do what he likes. And so for him, it's, he seems uncertain of what he's going to do. And I think because of this performance, I think there's more uncertainty there, because Golovkin doesn't really need it. I mean, he's now an alphabet trinket holder, so he has some obligation there, especially because it's the IBF and they're a bit stricter with their mandatory process and whatever. So it's, the question to me is, where does Golovkin go? Alvarez is at the peak of his powers. He can do what he likes. Golovkin, less so, obviously. So does he give Derevyanchenko a rematch? I think it's possible. I've heard some rumors about him fighting the Polish guy, Kamil Zeramita, who was on the undercard of that fight. And he actually got a stoppage. He obviously doesn't have big knockout power, but you could see that he's got some schooling. I think he actually beat Solecki twice in the amateurs. He's a pretty well-schooled guy, good jab, pretty accurate, but not a big threat to Golovkin. And, of course, they're trying to... Again, the rumors, of course. This is all rumor until something is signed and sealed. They're trying to get him as an IBF mandatory. But yeah, it's tough, because if Golovkin is honest with himself and about where he's at in his career, he should think to himself, hey, it might be time to let off the gas just a little bit. If that takes getting rid of the alphabet trinket and just focusing on, the bigger money fights, because he's got, a few fights left on his DAZN deal. I mean, again, it's just whether he wants to be realistic or not. Of course, the allure of the Canelo money is always going to be there, and DAZN, on their part, they probably will push for that regardless of Golovkin's current stature, because it brings in the most revenue and it generates the most subscribers. But if that doesn't come off, and I could very well see that, I wouldn't mind Derevyanchenko rematch. I was also thinking a fight with Riyado Murata. He's obviously very popular in Japan. He had something like, 20 million people watch him in his rematch with Brandt. He's a legitimate top 10 guy. I think that would be a good option for him at this point, if Alvarez doesn't come off, if Derevyanchenko doesn't come off.
Yeah, I think that, Golovkin's more businessman than people think, and he's always wanted that Canelo Alvarez money, and he wants it one more time, and I think that'll be his main goal if he can get it. Like we're saying, you don't know what Canelo is going to do, but I think it's possible. Golovkin is getting older. I mean, for a middleweight, certainly getting older at the age of 37. And even though there's some even in this day and age, when you get to boxers over age 30, you can't take the age part for granted. But, with Golovkin, there is another factor that, frankly, for whatever the reasons, you have to look at actually what occurred. And his opposition, before Jacobs just really wasn't particularly good. I mean, whatever these guys, were ranked with the too many classes in the alphabets, you just really look at it, it wasn't that good. And for me, he's always going to be a guy that's tough to evaluate. It's possible if he had better opposition earlier that he would have rose to the occasion, but it's also possible that he would have had trouble similar to what he's had when he's fought better guys, because there's definitely a marked difference there. But to his credit, when he fought lesser opposition, he put together an impressive knockout streak, which you just don't see every day, and that's a good indication that he's on a higher level. I think what's kind of ironic about some of the people that are particular fans of Golovkin is, I think, as you alluded to, Jeremiah, I think because of their dislike of Alvarez, I think that they lose sight of their best arguments in Golovkin's favor, which, if I were going to make the case for Golovkin, what I'd kind of say about the competition argument would be, I'd say, well, when the guy then got into his middle 30s, he fought Canelo Alvarez, who's the top middleweight in the world in terms of being lineal champ and probably going to go down as an all-time great. And, he fought the guy, to a draw once and another very, very close decision. I think that's actually something that in the long run, when you look back at his career, works in his favor. That's what, for me, is always kind of a head-scratcher, where a lot of people who are fans of Golovkin and where they see him fitting in historically tend to detract from Canelo Alvarez, because they'll say that Golovkin wasn't showing any slippage against Canelo Alvarez because they want to make the arguments that he won the fight, but that doesn't necessarily fit the narrative that then he shows age slippage whenever he's not fighting Canelo Alvarez and has a tough fight, but he doesn't show it when he's fighting Canelo Alvarez. So, I think people got to kind of get in there. I think for me with Golovkin, it's both. He's getting older, and when you're in your mid-30s, you're never going to perform quite as well when you're even a heavyweight, even though heavyweights mature later. 35's 35, so even in today's day and age, you're never going to be quite exactly what you were. But you also have to Golovkin that the competition certainly was a lot different with Derevyanchenko, who, let's remember too, Derevyanchenko is 34 years old himself, so he's already a guy that's past his physical prime. So, and Jacobs in his 30s as well, and then Alvarez. These were the best guys he fought. They were all tough fights. He did fight him when he was, in his 30s, but they're just much tougher opposition than he fought earlier in his career, and it's really not even close. So it makes it kind of difficult, but I think it may end up coming if Canelo doesn't want it. I think even Golovkin and DAZN are probably both looking at it, and even though it's a very tough fight, as we just saw, I think we might see Golovkin Derevyanchenko 2 before Golovkin finishes things out. Now the problem is outside of that fight is, like you mentioned, he's talking about an IBF mandatory, and we've already recently had, Matt Erosian, which, that's Golovkin's not really fault. The Canelo rematch fell out, but then we got Rolls. So I got a feeling we're going to be getting a lot of that with alphabet talk, and that's just what kind of frustrates me. We don't need that. As you suggested, I would actually try to see Golovkin dump the alphabet belt at this stuff in his career. He's an entertaining fighter. He's got a lot of fans, and just pick the best fights for him and forget about this IBF mandatory stuff or defending IBF middleweight titles.
Yeah, I'm not. Obviously, the alphabet stuff is just, it's unfortunate because it becomes a guise. You can use it as an excuse for this or that. But, as you alluded to, the Rolls bout, the Martirosyan bout, not really his fault. But we are talking about a guy still at 34 plus years of age who has fought, arguably the 3 best middleweights. You can't argue with Jacobs and Alvarez. If you want to argue about Derevyanchenko, I think that's fine. Again, if you had him at 5 or 6, I wouldn't be that upset at you. Again, there's a lot of details that goes along in there, but I think because Derevyanchenko fought Jacobs closely, he did show that he was at a high level. So depending on who you use, depending on how you feel, we are talking about Golovkin, who at 34 plus years of age, in his last 6 fights, 4 of those have been against arguably the 3 best middleweights in the world. And I think that's impressive because no matter how you felt about his opposition before, there just aren't a lot of guys doing that at 34 plus years of age, especially at middleweight. In fact, when I had John Raspani on, the focus was middleweights and the aging process. And of course, there's a lot of nuance that goes into that. Depends on who you fight, what your amateur background was, et cetera, et cetera. But Golovkin operating at this level at 37 years old does show that he is an outlier. There are very few guys who make it to this. I mean, we had Emil Griffith, who was, I think he was competitive to about 34, 35. Monzon was out by 34. I think Hagler was gone by 32. Zale lost his title by 35. Hopkins, obviously, he was 40 when he lost it. So there are very few guys who make it to about 34, 35 and are still operating on a high level. So I think, again, that he deserves some credit for that. There are very few guys who are able to do so. And typically the people who do make it that far are boxer types like Sergio Martinez, Bernard Hopkins, et cetera, et cetera. Anyways, we'll just have to wait and see what becomes of all of this. Golovkin and Alvarez are obviously held to higher standards than these other guys, because it's funny. You do see Alvarez, and I actually did a solo podcast by myself just ranting about this, about how Alvarez and Golovkin are clearly fighting tougher opposition than the vast majority of fighters on earth. I mean, they were fighting themselves, and they were both pound-for-pounders. Find me some other guys who are doing that. You look at the pound-for-pound list, Inoue is not doing that. He hasn't fought a single pound-for-pounder. Crawford, as good as he is, hasn't fought a single pound-for-pounder. You look at Errol Spence, not a pound-for-pounder. Usyk, not a pound-for-pounder. I mean, so these two represent the cream of the crop, in my opinion.
He did fight Mikey Garcia, but he's coming up from the lower weight class.
What'd you say?
Errol Spence did fight Mikey Garcia, but coming up from the lower weight class.
Yes, you are right. That is duly noted. I will say, though, that my only problem with that is that Mikey Garcia is not a pound-for-pound operator at 147. You're right, but I don't think Garcia is. He's not a pound-for-pounder at 147. He's not that level of operator. He's good, obviously, but it's just there are very few guys operating on that level. Yet it seems as if Canelo Alvarez and Golovkin are getting the most flack for their opposition. I mean, I often find myself on these forums and, they're portraying Demetrius Andrade or Jermall Charlo as boogeymen of the division. And, we're talking about a guy in Charlo who, he earned his position by fighting Highland, which was a complete mismatch. Highland was injured. I mean, it was a farce. We've talked about that at length too. Andrade, who's beaten, he beat the African guy. He beat Kolke. He did do a good job with Selecki. I got to give him that. But we're talking about
Andrade did pull out of the fight with Jermall Charlo. People want to forget that now.
Right. Yeah, no, that's a good call. And it seems as if the guys who are, and it always works this way in any sports. The people who are operating on the highest levels, they get put under the microscope more than anybody. But it's worth noting that Alvarez and Golovkin are actually taking on tough opposition. You look at Canelo Alvarez's year. I mean, and if beating Daniel Jacobs, who was number 3 in the division, behind Golovkin, and then beating Kovalev, I mean, unless Kovalev is really shot, bad, we're talking about a potential Fighter of the Year candidate here. He will be a Fighter of the Year candidate. He very well may win the award. And so let's just, I think people need to focus on the good, not as much as the bad as they do. But anyways, let's talk about the Alexander Usyk, Chaz Witherspoon barn burner that is soon to be. Now, Chaz Witherspoon is a killer. He's got a phenomenal right hand. Everybody in the heavyweight division is ducking him, so give Usyk credit here. No, Witherspoon is a replacement of a replacement. I don't think he's had a decent win in like 11 years, if he even had one. They probably pulled him out of his living room and into the ring, and it seems like a complete mismatch.
Yeah, this is bad, and I got to say it from the beginning, and it doesn't. I don't think Usyk's doing this personally or anything. I don't think he's afraid of anybody. But I thought what's really bad about this for me is I thought the initial opponent, Takam, was a joke. I mean, I didn't think it would show us anything about Usyk, fight any legit top 10 guys in the division, and especially with Takam's age and the style, and just been knocked out by Derek Chisora. And then we worked our way down somehow from that through Tyrone Spong to Chaz Witherspoon. And this is almost where Hearn needs to make an adjustment. I mean, this is pointless. This really, truly is pointless. And, you and I were talking right before we started doing the podcast here that, it's really the problem with what boxing promoters are offering is it's just the lowest common denominator thing that they can get hardcore fans to talk about or tune into, and they're going to feed that to you the vast majority of the time. And boxing previously was, that there had to be, some entertainment value of fight that we're giving. In other words, if Usyk was going to have a heavyweight fight, before he took on a Joshua or a Ruiz or a Wilder or a Fury, it was going to be against some legitimate contender, that people would want to tune in, and at least the opponent would have some chance. And every once in a while there would be an upset there, but we're not getting anything close to that. I mean, it's just really meaningless that he's fighting Chaz Witherspoon. I like reminding people of this because, it's within the last 30 years or so it's not complete ancient history, even though it's a while back. I mean, Michael Spinks made his heavyweight debut from light heavyweight against Larry Holmes, who was undefeated, 48-0. It's just, we don't need this. It almost seems to me, and here's, we talk about that, too many fights marinating and things like that. I thought of something this afternoon too on this exact subject, because it's really Hearn that was probably, steering Usyk off it, trying to protect. I'm not saying that Usyk was going to definitely beat Joshua. I didn't think he necessarily would, even though Joshua, had a flop against Ruiz. And we'll see what happens in the rematch. But getting back to the point was that, Usyk's with Hearn now. Hearn could have just had Usyk fight Joshua instead of Ruiz. I mean, if you go way back to, when they were first, setting the fight and it was going to be Jarrell Miller and stuff. In other words, it's always, we're holding that off and everything. And I'm just sort of saying, like, let's say you were Usyk and you were offered that assignment and you took it. I mean, it's possible right now he could have been the guy that beat Joshua. And, sometimes maybe the fighters don't look back at that. In other words, and instead he's fighting Chaz Witherspoon. So that's something I think that you lose with all these fights delayed.
Yeah, well, it is not an interesting fight, that is for sure. I mean, I don't even know what to say about Chaz Witherspoon. I've seen him. He's obviously not his father, not even close. It's just a mismatch. There's not much to enjoy there. Again, I'm not so critical just because it was. He can't help that his opponent is taking PEDs or that his opponent is getting injured. I wasn't that down on Takam just because I think he is a serviceable veteran, and not everybody is, going straight from, their division to a guy like Larry Holmes. In fact, guy Holyfield was, I don't think he stepped up that high when he first entered. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he fought somebody like Burt Cooper. I can't quite remember. But either way, this does not represent anything other than maybe an acclimation of the weight. Maybe that's it. I don't know what else to say. I expect a stoppage. I think we all do. I'm just hoping that he gets it for his sake and he doesn't, struggle for some reason. And, I suppose there's a way Chaz Witherspoon could expose some flaws. I suppose he could be big and physical, but he's not really like that. I've seen him before. So I don't expect much in terms of competitiveness. And I forgot to mention that Dimitri Bivol is fighting Lennon Castillo on the undercard. I don't expect that to be much of a match either. Castillo is a Cuban. He's got pretty good pop, but it's not the kind of defense that you would like to see Bivol in either.
Yeah, no, Castillo has some pop, but he doesn't level for Bivol, and Bivol needs a stoppage. So really all this is about for him is, he is fighting a guy that's got a bit of pop, but he can't worry about in the sense of not getting careless, but he really needs a stoppage. I mean, he looked like a better puncher to me than people are now giving him credit for. And I still think he might punch pretty good, seeing him on his way up. I just think he's gotten real cautious, and he's kind of gotten actually overly enamored with his boxing skills. They're good, but I'm just saying that, he's not going to his power at all, and he really could use a stoppage here. The only thing you can say for Castillo is at least he's got some pop, but he doesn't have the skill level, the delivery system to land anything significant on Bivol, and I just don't know what the purpose of Chaz Witherspoon and Usyk's supposed to be. I think you're right. I mean, let's face it. I mean, Usyk's not a small guy. I mean, people are getting carried away with this stuff. I mean, the guy's 6'3". He's got a long reach. The cruiserweight limit now is 200 pounds. He's already beaten Joe Joyce in the WSB. I mean, this is just a joke to me. I mean, it's just, we don't need it. I mean, I think they were talking about Povetkin, and Povetkin, they were talking about some of the, even though Usyk has fought Gassiev, some of the Russian-Ukrainian tensions, and there is something there that then they didn't want to have the fight, and Povetkin didn't seem interested in it. But just a legit top 10 contender would be a reasonable level for this for Usyk, and we're not getting it. I don't think we're going to learn anything, and what gives me a headache even thinking about it in advance is, I don't think this will be the case, but if Usyk has the least bit of trouble or something like that, or it goes the distance, then hear all the tweets and social media that all the lazy analysts are going to, because Usyk's now fighting at heavyweight, and that kind of stuff just drives me crazy because, I mean, it's, he's that much better than Chaz Witherspoon, and if he doesn't stop him, it's not really going to be because Chaz Witherspoon's a heavyweight. It's going to be for who knows what other reason. But we'll see what happens. Because Usyk also, I think really Hunter was fortunate to go the distance against him. I mean, that I'm not saying it should have been because Hunter made it the distance, but that fight would have been stopped by a lot of referees on a couple of occasions late. And I think people are having revisionist history about how competitive Hunter was in the fight. It was just that, Usyk didn't get him out of there earlier, and he didn't end up getting him out, but it could have been stopped a few times. And I mention that because, to Usyk's credit, Hunter's fighting really well now as a heavyweight. So again, I'm getting back to the point of, I just don't think that if Usyk has some sort of with Chaz Witherspoon, which I don't think he will, but it'll really be because he's a heavyweight. So I just don't know what we get out of this.
Yes, and I think you're spot on with a lot of things you say. Again, there's not a necessity here. I don't know. We'll just see how things play out, and then we'll move on with their assessment, and then hope that Alexander Usyk gets something serious. And I think Alexander Usyk is an insurance policy for Eddie Hearn if Andy Ruiz does come through in the rematch. I know Usyk, again, these stupid alphabet trinkets, but he'll be the quote-unquote mandatory for Ruiz. If Ruiz pulls away, of course, he'll have a couple other titles, so that won't mean much, but it might mean something for, that alphabet soup organization and Eddie Hearn's ability to maintain it within his grasp. But yeah, there's not a whole lot going on here. So anyways, I'll give you the final word if you would like to do so, and then we'll wrap it up.
Well, I think you make a good point. I've been saying this for a little while, and I think you're right. Usyk does factor into that. No matter how things play out, either by a loss or by winning in an alphabet politics, I just don't see Andy Ruiz keeping that WBO heavyweight belt. Now, you and I, correctly, I think, are both not into the alphabet stuff, but it just has to do with the politics of the sport, to follow what's going on and why certain fights might end up happening, or if not, why they're happen. Like you said earlier, when Chef's how the alphabets become a cover for it. And, you, especially, let's face it, you do see how these British and European fans sometimes will look at things differently with the alphabets. let's say Ruiz beats Joshua again, and maybe it's not as convincing the second time or something like that, but he wins. You could easily see Anthony Joshua, Alexander Usyk for the vacant WBO heavyweight title. So in Great Britain, can't you? I mean, that's not really a big stretch or hard to see, is it? I mean, and you can just see where this stuff's going to end up.
Again, sorry for the delay. Just trying to get my volume right because I got to keep adjusting it. But yeah, we'll see how it goes. And once we see how it goes, hopefully I can get you back on, get your assessment, and we'll go from there. So
and it has been you're the upset. So I'm not saying there's going to be an upset, but I'll give it boxing that this year. It hasn't been planned, but maybe something wacky will happen this weekend in some fight. Who knows?
Yeah, maybe. And I will say, in regard to Dmitry Bivol, I think it's odd that people are saying, hey, he's a bit undersized at 175, so he should move down to 168. I think we should stop playing into that nonsense. I don't want to see any of these guys at 168. It's just it's like Kansas, man. It's a flyover state. There's no need to, plant your stake and build a house and keep plowing the fields. It's just not necessary. And we see, just by the talent throughout history, 168, it's not a glamour division. 175 is where the big boys are. That's where you should be competing. Callum Smith, all these guys, Bivol included. If he's undersized, that's fine, but he's beating, light heavyweights convincingly. He's probably, he's obviously up there with the best of the division. His resume is lacking just a little bit, but that's fine. He's carving out a nice thing. He's a bit young. But yeah, no need to go down to 168 for no reason. I don't need to see that. Bring these guys up from 168 and let them engage these guys. The Beterbievs, the Gvozdicks, the Bivols of the world, the Kovalevs, if Kovalev gets through it, maybe even Alvarez if he chooses to stay at 175. We'll see how that works. But yeah, let's get on with the big fights. Let's messing around in these junior super classes. They're not necessary. Anyways, hopefully I can get you back on, John, and we'll get your assessment, either the Usyk fight. Well, I'll get your assessment of the Usyk fight eventually. But yeah, there still is some decent fights coming up, so we'll have plenty to talk about. So as always, I thank you for coming on. And as always, we're brought to you by the Retired Boxers Foundation, Seat Giant. You know what I said at the beginning of the show. If you don't, rewind it when you listen to it. So for Jeremiah Preisser, I'm speaking with John Einreinhofer, and you've been listening to The Grueling Truth, where the legends speak.